Great, thanks a lot. Well, the meat of the evening will still be recorded. So, and last update from MNIPL, I want to highlight that with our partners, United Theological Seminary and RISE, we are having a celebration of Mississippi at Hidden Falls Park down on Mississippi in South St. Paul, and everybody's invited to this. It'll be a time of celebrating the river. We'll hear from naturalists and water protectors and everybody working on the water, and just exciting time to come together for food and spirit and music and song and enjoy this time together. So if you aren't a community connector, we encourage you to become a community connector officially. And I will be sending a link for signing up for that, or you can always email us here at MNIPL. And lastly, before we get going with our panel, I just want to shout out to the class from United Theological Seminary, who I think is on the call with us, doing a class at United Theological Seminary led by Professor Justin Sebiatanis, who's looking at all different faiths and the environment. So great to have you as guests here with us this evening. All right. So let's get started with our panelists. I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and we'll do that one by one to get going. And we're just going to go in alphabetical order here. So Prasad, would you please introduce yourself? Welcome, and we're glad you're here.
Hello, everyone. My name is first name Prasad, last name Bastodkar. I'm a practicing Hindu. I live in the Twin Cities in Plymouth. Been here for almost 20 plus years now. I am a oral and maxillofacial surgeon by profession, but as I said, I'm here to share my views on how Hinduism views climate change as a practicing Hindu. I also volunteer at the local Hindu temple here as well. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Prasad. Let's see. Payton, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Payton Hoegh. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a postulant for ordained ministry with the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, and I'm the program director for the Center for Spirituality and Nature, which is a nonprofit that's focused on deepening spirituality through engagement with the natural world and nurturing loving reciprocal relationship with the earth. I completed my seminary education at the Claremont School of Theology, where my focus was on eco-theology. And my ministry is really focused on community weaving and exploring how spiritual practice, mindfulness, and engagement in and with nature can inform and enrich our work of environmental advocacy. I feel like a little bit of an imposter here tonight in this space because I'm not joining from Minnesota. I live in Southern California with my wife and my cat on traditional unceded land of the Fernandeño Tataviam. But I do work with communities all over the country through my work with the Center for Spirituality and Nature. And I will say that my family is from Iowa, and I have really fond memories of fishing with my grandparents in Otter Tail Lake in Minnesota. So glad to be with you.
Well, thanks, Payton. Glad to have you with us. And just in case there might be folks on the call that don't know, Episcopalian is a branch of Christianity. Let's see, Rabbi Ricky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. I'm Rabbi Ricky Kamil, newer to the Twin Cities, been here about 2 years. I organize the justice work over at Temple Israel of Minneapolis, currently where we have a really wonderful sustainability and climate action team. But I do that just part-time, and my full-time job is with Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative, where I organize around building more deeply affordable housing. So far, loving my time in the Twin Cities, where I live with my wife, Rebecca, who's also a rabbi and a chaplain over at Fairview Hospital, our dog, Fievel, and our 3-year-old child, Matan, who you might hear a little bit upstairs during the presentation. But just very happy to be here with you all tonight.
That's great, Rabbi Ricky. Thank you. And Reverend Onryu Kennedy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm really honored to be here, and I just want to give a great shout out for the energy and effort that MNIPL has done on behalf of all beings. That is just a great gift. My pronouns are she, her, and I am very committed to untangling the karma of genocide in relation to my Zen Buddhist practice. And I've received transmission from both the Katagiri Roshi and Uchiyama Roshi lineage, the Soto Zen lineage. And in 2010 through 2021, I was one of the leaders at Clouds and Water Zen Center. In the spring of 2020, I journeyed to Japan, my second journey there, to lead the spring Ango as Shuso. So I was a leading monk of an international Zen monastery. I recently completed a Buddhist training in Engaged Buddhism at Upaya Zen Center, and I think that Engaged Buddhism is very much a part of this practice. I have an MA in counseling psychology, and I've worked with families and children for over 22 years. So thank you for this opportunity to share.
Thank you, Onryu. We're glad you're with us. Thanks so much. Just before we get started with the kind of first question, I want to just acknowledge that we have 4 wonderful faith traditions represented here, but there are clearly faiths that are not represented here. And, for the sake of time and to give people space to really dig into the wisdom, we didn't want to pack this full of all the different faith traditions. So look for MNIPL to have another one of these in the future, in which we'll be able to invite faith leaders from the traditions who are not represented here. But let's get started with these wonderful faith traditions. So thank you all for being here. And maybe Onryu, you would start us off. I'd like to ask each of you, we arrive here on the planet as a human being. We recognize some similarity with the world around us and maybe some difference with the non-human world. What does your faith tradition teach us about, or teach its followers about, that relationship between humans and the earth?
I think one of the things I want to acknowledge is that each faith tradition has their own unique gifts as a faith tradition, and as a collective, we, I believe, have the same aim, and that is to relieve the suffering, our own suffering and the suffering of all beings, including animals and grasses, trees, and walls, like Dogen Zenji, the patriarch of our lineage, says. So I would like to acknowledge that. I think one of the beautiful offerings that Zen Buddhism has is what's called the Bodhisattva vow. The Bodhisattva is a being who mutually supports all beings through compassion and skillful means. And because bodhisattvas suffer too, and the suffering creates a connection of desire to relieve that suffering, because nobody wants to suffer, really. And I think that what develops as a result is this interconnectedness. And one of the images in Zen is Indra's net. And this net is connected to, if you could imagine a net and it has jewels, and the jewels are connected to another jewel. And each jewel is a being in a world within itself, and it's all connected to each other. And when one jewel is affected, all the jewels within the net are touched and affected. So there's a ripple effect that happens. It's like a pebble that's tossed into a lake, and one can witness the ripples going out. So this interconnectedness is really essential to our practice, in that it's inconceivable to our mind how we can be connected in this vast web of life, and yet we are. And within this web, all beings are essential. All beings belong. All beings have gifts to offer. And I think that part of the vow includes both what is the relative, the world in which I live, the world being a white converted Zen Buddhist, living on stolen land, and the karma around that, as well as the universal, the oneness that can be experienced. So I think that one of the things too that's important is that there's no bypassing the relative. It's really important as part of a spiritual practice that the relative is taken care of, that our life is part of our practice. It's not separate from our practice. And one of the stories about Buddha is that when Buddha was enlightened, he said, I, together with all beings in this great earth, are enlightened. So he said right there, he didn't do it alone. He did it in relationship, in connection with all beings, with the trees, with the animals, with the demons. So I think that interconnectedness is essential as part of the practice, and part of what Zen can offer. So thank you.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thanks a lot for giving us that. That's really fascinating.
Thank you.
Prasad, would you like to tell us about Hinduism and the way Hinduism thinks about this Earth-human relationship?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to start off by saying this ancient Sanskrit shloka, or a spiritual saying, which basically goes, Om Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagathena. Basically, what that means is the whole universe is enveloped in God, and also He dwells in the entire universe. So God is in everything, and everything is clothed within God. So both are simultaneously true. So whatever is moving or not moving in this universe is all penetrated and enclosed by Him. So that kind of tells you that we are not sort of the kings of this creation. We are essentially a part of it like anything else. There's another sacred text which says, ether, air, fire, water, earth, planets, all creatures, directions, trees and plants, rivers and seas, they're all organs of the God's body. Remembering this, a devotee respects all species. So essentially, looking at this creation being divine, that divine spirit manifesting in everything around you, you'll always see that apart from us, nature is always in a perfect balance. And for some reason, if there's like a swarm of locusts who kind of take over, we call them pests, right? And the earth, the nature, and the divine will find a way to sort of eventually kind of come back to that harmony. As human beings, I think we have a blessing that allows us free will and ability to make conscious decisions. And the aim should be to follow the path of dharma, a righteous way of life, not only to uphold human morals and ideals, but also be stewards of the world, the environment, the climate, and every living entity that lives on it. And it's pretty obvious looking around you, taking cues from what's happening. There's droughts, there's floods, there's forest fires, rising sea levels, taking steps on a personal level to combat these climatic changes, I think is what should be each and everyone's dharmic duty according to Hinduism. So that's hopefully, I hope you understand where Hinduism comes from in this sort of a climate change concept.
Well, thank you. Would you expound just a little bit on that dharma duty, kind of the roots of that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, dharma means a righteous way of life, like, so doing kind of what's good for, everyone around you. One of the big things about dharma is ahimsa. Ahimsa means, do no harm, right? So to minimize the harm we cause to our actions in our ordinary day-to-day lives, climate change, as we know, creates pain, suffering, and violence for a lot of creatures. People get displaced, a lot of things happen. So a conscious effort to protect the world around us and all the beings therein becomes an act of service to the divine or an act of worship. So that's basically what would be a part of dharma, how you could treat not only humans equally, but also everything around you, including the nature and the animals and, the plants and everything in a respectful way, looking at the divine in it. So that would be a part of your dharmic tradition or the way of life.
I see. Oh, that's interesting. Gosh, thank you. Rich. Rabbi Ricky, would you like to tell us about the Jewish approach to the human-earth relationship?
I would be happy to. And whenever I get a question about a different topic, I always like to start at the beginning of whatever it is that I'm, starting to read to find kind of the answer. And it usually means that I only get to the beginning of something because I find a rabbit hole that I want to jump down to really type explore. So I got to the first and second chapter of the book of Genesis in the Torah. Those are the first two chapters of the entire book. But in them, I think we get a really wonderful understanding of this human-earth relationship. Before getting into actually what that relationship is, though, I always want to take just a moment of looking at that first chapter and seeing how intention is so much a part of that, of that first chapter, of really in this creation of the world. And you may have heard, depending on your faith tradition, of a verse that says that God's spirit hovered over the waters in the first few verses of the Jewish Torah, of the Hebrew Bible. And although I do, like that translation, I always actually like to translate it more as God's aspiration was really what was hovering over that water, that there was a clear intent with the ordering of each day, there was something new created in the world. So then we'll fast forward, going over a few days, although it's important to see, all this wonderful, the things that were created first were the things of the earth, the waters, the lights in the sky, all these wonderful things, our plant life and animal life, all created first among those different days. Until finally we get to the sixth day, where we get the big animals and humans coming on that sixth day as well. And it's actually very much in that in those verses that God says that that God is going to create humans, what's called B'Tselem Elohim, or in the image of God. And in this way, I think that this intention that's going throughout this whole chapter is that we are partners in this creation of the world. And in that, we have actually a very special obligation to care for everything that is around us. And actually, I'm going to challenge the text at first, and then we'll get to the second chapter, which I think has the better way of saying it. But in the first chapter, it says that humans then have dominion over all the earth, over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air. It goes through a whole litany of different things. But there is a commentator on the Torah from about 1,000 years ago, whom I do like, who says that the dominion isn't his name is Rashi. It says this dominion is not that there's, kind of we're ruling over, but that we're in a position to be able to actually care for a broader perspective of how, how we can make the world a better place. So the dominion is actually a place of, that there's a responsibility to that in that care. We then, in the second chapter, again, I think even a more commandment, a more mitzvah, as I might call it, of caring for the earth, when the first human is created, or we have first human created in the first chapter, the first humans, and then we get Adam and then Eve in the second chapter. We get a clear commandment in verse 15 that said, God settled the human, the people, in the Garden of Eden to till and to tend it. In Hebrew, le'avda ul shamara, or sorry, shomra. And this, and again, that's an okay translation, but really, I think this idea to work, and I think even more importantly, to guard it, to make sure that everything can flourish, that we can use all the gifts that we have as a species to be able to make sure that we know that we live in an ecosystem where everything needs to be able to flourish. So in my opinion, I would say that the human-earth relationship is one that's very much laid out in those first couple chapters of the Hebrew Bible, to really say that we are there to be stewards and caring for the world around us. And not only that it's a very important commandment, and one that actually makes it so that we can be B'Tselem Elohim, or created in that image of God.
Wow, that was a full meal there of text. I hope I followed that fully, but yeah, there's a lot of riches in there. Thank you. Gosh. Would you maybe comment just a little bit on the nature of your faith as a having that text as a part of it, or kind of a basis for it?
Sure. So in Judaism, text is something which is, with the Hebrew Bible first, then go into a little bit of the what I guess we would call the rabbinic works from about 2,000 years ago, that are all built on each other to be able to create a system of, I would call, kind of ethics, to be able to live in our world where everyone, in my opinion, can thrive, and not just everyone, but everything as well. But the text is able to kind of ground that in certain commandments, and then of course there's plenty of commandments I disagree with, and there's a lot of expanding upon that and how we can, really understand the values behind that, and how we can make a better world together. But yeah, kind of builds from this Hebrew Bible all the way out. Still interpretations happening today, as you might see. So yeah, the text is a very important part of Judaism and how we kind of understand the world around us.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate that. I thought I knew a little bit about that, but that helps fill it out for me better and understand the basis there. Yeah. Well, thank you, Rabbi Ricky. Appreciate that. Payton, would you like to take this question also, please, about the human-earth relationship?
Yeah, I love the beautiful overlap that seems to be emerging in everything that's been said, and what I'll probably share. Although there is quite a weight of responsibility for speaking for an entire tradition. But for the Christian tradition specifically, this has become kind of a complex question, because, in examining the roots of our contemporary ecological crisis, Lynn White Jr., a historian, actually named the Christian church's influence as allowing for a movement away from connection to the earth and providing a sort of cover for environmental exploitation. And I actually think that there's a lot in that thesis that I'd agree with. But at its core, I think the authentic core of the Christian tradition really rejects that kind of imbalanced human nature relationship that Rabbi Ricky actually named in that dominion language. For me, I mean, we borrow our cosmology from our Jewish forebears. And so we're grateful to the Hebrew text for that. And it really does speak to that human-earth relationship, and really that human-earth and God relationship, and going into our connection to the non-human world as well. The Genesis account that Ricky spoke to really offers this beautiful description of creation where God forms humankind from the earth itself and breathes the spark of life into our being. And so we are very literally of the earth. And so from the beginning, we are formed from this relational act of touch and breath And I really think that this provides the foundation for the wisdom of the Christian tradition and what it offers when it comes to how we should relate to and engage with the earth. And even just moving beyond our cosmology or our creation story to kind of the primary prophets of our tradition. We see Jesus, our primary prophet figure, persistently relying on natural imagery in his teachings and stepping out into the natural world for rest and renewal. We see the Apostle Paul proclaiming in his writings that all of creation is clear evidence of God. And then we can look along the history of our tradition to the emergence of monastic communities in the deserts of Egypt and the rich interweaving of land-based spirituality and Christian theology and Celtic practice. And we really see that the earth itself and the natural world has been a really firm and formative thread in the Christian tradition. I do feel that sometimes we've lost touch with some of the wisdom that is inherent in that relationship between humans, God, the earth. And yet, that essential wisdom still lies at the heart of what we believe. And within my own Episcopal denomination, we're really working hard to reconnect with that teaching and really explore the ways that it informs and instructs our work when it comes to environmental care. At our most recent General Convention of the Episcopal Church, our bishops issued a statement that proclaimed, and I'll just quote it directly, "We are only fully human and fully alive when we are in right relationship with the whole created order. Apart from each other and nature, we are not our whole selves." And for me, this really, it calls us back to relationship and kinship with the earth. And then, as my colleagues on the panel here have mentioned, it directs us to this sense of responsible action to protect and preserve this earth in face of the threats of climate change and environmental crisis.
Thank you, Payton. That's really rich there with a lot of references to what's happening in Christianity today, maybe. That's very helpful. Thank you. If I could offer a somewhat elementary metaphor, sometimes at Interfaith Power and Light, we think of, we find it helpful to think of faith as, when we use the word interfaith, it means that we're not looking for a common thread. We see faiths as distinct and offering the wisdom on their own. And the metaphor I would use that's kind of elementary is maybe, no one would tend to say curling better than cricket, or bobsledding better than baseball. It's like people wouldn't compare different sports in a judgment or value-laden way. And we seek the same type of respect in the work that we do interfaith. So I want to resist in this call and in other spaces, to just say, oh, well, that's all similar, or, oh, those are the same thing in different words, or I don't think that that's necessarily the case, or necessarily helpful for us as listeners. But what I'd like to invite you as panelists to do is just, did anything as you listened, or maybe thought back over what you said yourself, was there an added comment that you wanted to make that you thought, oh, I'd like to say this or that about my tradition, and I'll just invite anybody that wants to step forward there of our panelists. All right, well, maybe something else will come up as we dig into the next question. That's fine. So you all have described kind of this vision that your faith tradition brings to the folks that follow it and to the world about that human earth relationship. Now thinking about, the main reason that Interfaith Power Light exists, and that a lot of the work that people within each of your traditions is doing, we're facing this very big global crisis of detriment to the whole fabric of our being, in a way, all these creatures and the atmosphere, and through global warming and the attendant consequences that happen with fires and heat waves and droughts and more intense storms, and all these different things that the human and creature community are facing. I'd like you to invite you to reflect on what is your tradition offer the folks that follow it, a way to conceive of this problem that we're facing on this global scale, and what might be a way forward for people that follow your tradition within that. And I think, Prasad, you did a good job of starting that. You referenced that some in your talk, so maybe I would turn to you first, if you don't mind, and ask you, to reflect on that.
Sure. I mean, part of it is, something that you can do on paper, right? So I know there was a Hindu Declaration on Climate Change that was adopted in the Parliament of World Religions, I believe in 2009. And then I believe in the Paris Climate Conference, they actually kind of, again, advocated it. And on that, they kind of talk about a lot of things as Hindus, or obviously the whole entire world, can kind of subscribe to. I already mentioned about ahimsa, or minimize harm, right? How to do that in day-to-day lives. If you see the whole creation or the earth as a divine extension of your own self, naturally, even in your best interest, you're not going to do or take any actions that's going to harm anything around you, right? So that's one. Hinduism always teaches us, to live within your means, live a simpler life, devoid of excessive material desires, not taking more than any of the, reasonable, just use your reasonable share of resources, care for everything around you. Hindus are supposed to be vegetarians. Just the fact that if you can adopt a plant-based diet, that can have a pretty significant environmental impact. If you traditionally go to like a village in India, you will see that it's all naturally resourced. Cows are supposed to be these creatures that, but it's all use their cow dung, which is biodegradable. They use like jute and leaves and, the things that come off coconut. It's basically trying to sort of stick to the nature, use as less as you can, and respect everything around you and care for everybody. It automatically can reverse some of the damages that have been done to date.
That's interesting. I wasn't sure, you reference Hindus being vegetarians. Is that across the faith? Is that all Hindus? Or
So not necessarily. Like, take me for granted. I don't. I do eat. I am non-vegetarian, so I will eat chicken or fish. But at the end of the day, it's trying to avoid excess. If we are cultivating, millions of cows and chickens and pigs just so that we can overindulge and eat and have our Big Macs every day, or double Whoppers, whatever you want to call it, it does create that silent, sort of threat to the environment. These are just subtle things. So less consumption automatically means there's more resources available. There's less fossil fuel being burned, less things happening, using cleaner energy, doing your own part in a way. Everybody knows Mahatma Gandhi, right? And he was a, Hindu, freedom fighter. And his words were, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do. So those are kind of powerful words for me. You do your own part, whether it's, I tell my kids, just make sure, what is compostable, put it in the composting part. You have all these bins out there. Do your little part, of trying to do what's right, and keep things clean around you. You use less water, use less electricity, and all these little things, actions eventually add up.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, that's good. Ah, very good. Thank you. Onryu, would you like to tackle that question about the climate change and what Buddhism is inviting folks to, or teaching, or guiding to?
Yeah, thank you. I want to start out with something that Dogen Zenji, again, one of our ancestors of Soto Zen, said. He said, "The power of continuous practice confirms you as well as others. It means your practice affects the entire earth and the entire sky in the 10 directions. Although not noticed by others or by yourself, it is so." What I hear Dogen Zenji saying is that to really show up, that the self, the egocentricity and the self-centeredness needs to drop to our capacity. And one of the ways that Buddhism can support this dropping of self so that more of life can flow through, because when I am full of self, it's very difficult to be present to people in front of me, to be present to conditions that are arising, to be present to the suffering, to be present to the air that's very difficult for many people to breathe because of the fires in Canada. So I think one of the things that Zen Buddhism can offer is meditation. This meditation, I use the image of a lake on a windy day. This lake is like the mind. And depending upon the conditions that are arising, the mind can be just really agitated. And when the mind is agitated, it's very difficult to really have any ability to respond in a way that is wholesome for oneself and all beings. And with meditation, we understand the nature of the mind is to think. So we just allow the mind to think without adding stories, without adding additional processes to the thinking mind. And eventually what will happen is that the mind will settle. And when the mind settles and calm, it's like a lake that the wind is no longer agitating the surface. The surface begins to calm on the lake, so that in that calming, the lake begins to settle and you can see more deeply and more clearly what is actually going on. So when in meditation, this calming helps to settle the mind. And in the settling, insights and wisdom beyond just the common sense understanding of what's going on, a deeper wisdom that's inconceivable, that's in relationship to the conditions of what's arising. And this wisdom is connected with compassion, and they become like a superpower. And this superpower can be used, it may seem superficial, but in my experience, it has great potential for mutually benefiting oneself and all beings in the great earth. But if the mind is confused, it cannot function in a way that is helpful for anybody, including the thinking mind of the person. So I think that this coming from a place of silence, as a result of the meditation experience, has possibilities of really supporting oneself, the world in which one is living, and also maybe thinking beyond the boundaries, the social construction of the reality that we are experiencing. What is unimaginable? What is inconceivable that can be possibly helpful? And as a collective, I believe that when we come together, the possibilities are inconceivable. It's unimaginable. And it has wisdom and it has compassion. So thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That's a real transformation you're talking about of the human.
Of the human.
Thank you. Rabbi Ricky, would you like to tell us about Judaism with respect to that question about climate change and what we're wrestling with as a human community, global community?
Of course. So whenever I get the question about how we can be involved into the solution, no matter what the justice area, I usually have the same answer, which is good. That means I didn't have to prepare anything new for tonight. But it's also something that that does have some really great specifics when it comes to sustainability and climate action. So one of my favorite verses is this loving your neighbor as you would yourself. It's a great, sometimes we consider it the golden rule, whatever it might be. And I think in a lot of our faith traditions, we have something similar to that of always being out there for others. But in some ways, I think that a better translation is actually act lovingly with your neighbor, for they are really just like you. And the word neighbor here is something that I can think really can extend to so much in our communities. It's and not just me saying that. This is thousands of years tradition of different rabbis saying that as well. The neighbor can really extend to everything. So for me, that is a call to organize around the issues that we have in our communities, and especially neighbors here, not just meaning our human neighbors, but all our entire world neighbors, all our animal and plants, and our entire earth is part of this as well. One other commandment that we have in Judaism is this idea of bal tashchit, or not to destroy. And that's expounded upon, saying that the world is not superfluous or vain. It's all in it must be sustained. And with that, we have this idea of really wanting to be part of a solution and knowing that we can collectively come together to really act for justice. So I think there's a lot of really wonderful personal responsibility things that we can do to make our world a better place. But how can we also come together to say, this is something, this, whatever it might be, is something that's really harming our planet. How can we come together? And this is also maybe me as an organizer speaking here, but how can we build power and stop it? How can we make it so that we can live our values and really change the direction that our world is going to make it? Because this is a big problem that requires a big solution. And I really get that coming from that verse of saying that we are acting lovingly with our neighbors because they really just are like us. We're all here. And, I always think of that, that picture, forgetting, I am a little bit of a space nerd. And I forget that I think it's Voyager 1, but one of the first pictures that you get, like when it's out of a certain amount away from the Earth, and it's like this tiny blue dot, that is what the Earth is. And it's like that's where we and everything that has existed, at least in our on Earth, is. And how can we come together to make that to make sure that it is sustainable? So that's and so that's why I always say that. And we're anything. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is actually just being here and echo the wonderful phrase for Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, how we bring together faith communities to really act for change. Because I'm always just a faith community organizer. That's my favorite thing to do, because we're building on values that we have, and we have community structure that's here to really be able to change the world. And just thank you everyone here to everyone teaching me more about how we're all the wonderful, traditions and caring for her.
Thanks, Rabbi Ricky. Oh, that's, yeah, the neighbor, that's a very elemental principle there. I like that. You're going back to the roots. That's really nice. Thank you. Payton, I would give that question to you about Christianity. What Christianity offer for grappling with this huge global problem that we have?
Yeah, I spoke in my earlier answer just about the Christian tradition being built upon an understanding of a relational God. And I do believe that our tradition really calls us to deep and intentional relational work with our siblings and neighbors, both human and non-human. And so, speaking just specifically to the Episcopal denominational tradition, what guides us in that relational work is our baptismal covenant or our baptismal vows. And I often paraphrase them as kind of defining, how we seek justice and peace. And they really call us to humility, service, and action. And that really is the foundational principle of environmental advocacy and climate action. What's interesting to me is that, even as we do all of these practical actions in order to respond to these threats, we are approaching this as people of faith with additional resources. And so I'm always encouraging folks to really embrace that more fully, to be able to step into the work of relationship, the work of justice-oriented action with all of the gifts that our traditions bring to this work. And so as we respond to the threat of climate crisis, we know that the data is never enough to change people's minds or to change people's hearts. And so the principles that my colleagues have spoken about, just about loving our neighbors and the interconnection of this world and the call to mindfulness and all of those gifts of our traditions really speak to the heart of the work that we're doing together. And so we need in these efforts for environmental care more than statistics and reports. We even need more than the practical actions that we can take to make changes in our own lives. We really need to speak to the heart of this issue and go beyond kind of the hand-wringing of our scientific projections to really speak to the world that we want to create together. And so our religious traditions, and of course my own, brings us to the heart of this work and reminds us of the importance of balancing our practical action with contemplation and our very intentional efforts to make changes with mindful nourishment of our spirits. And so for me, that really guides us. My work with the Center for Spirituality and Nature is about building engagement and relationship with our local ecosystems, being able to see the created world as the gift that it is, to be able to lean into our relationship with something that was created alongside us. And so for me, I really want to just highlight the way that our traditions and the Christian tradition really does draw us to this sense of awe and this sense of wonder. Because I really believe that that's what we need when we are moving into responses to environmental crisis. Albert Camus said that we need facts that the heart can feel. And I think that it's our religious traditions that offer us those facts or those truths that we can feel together. And I do believe that the Christian tradition is what really provides that foundation for me in my environmental advocacy in order to lean into the spiritual resonance of this world that is such a gift, but is so threatened right now. And so it's a really beautiful experience to be able to kind of explore that deeply with all of you and to see the ways that, all of our traditions are really approaching that in unique, but really important ways.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I was noticing my experience with being with you and listening to each of you speak, that the difference between the spaces I'm often in as an organizer, where I ask the question and we say, well, we need a heat pump, or we need to change this law, or we need, and it's so refreshing to be with faith leaders who are saying, speaking about the heart and the mind and the eyes and what the eyes see, and the transformation. That's really appreciate that. We have some time that we'll be able to move into Q&A. And so I welcome, folks, if you want to put questions in the chat, if you have a question that's for all our panelists, or if you have a question that's for one of our panelists, I welcome those. Feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll pick the ones up that we can get to tonight. But I'd like to start off those questions by turning to you, Onryu. I know you've done a lot with Indigenous leaders, and you've been in Indigenous spaces with resisting pipelines at Standing Rock and Line 3, and putting together conferences that are Indigenous led, that kind of thing. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about the place where you've experienced your faith, Buddhism, within these Indigenous spaces, and what maybe a little bit about what that means for you.
Thank you for that question, because for me, in Zen Buddhism, karma is very significant. It's cause and effect in the results of what is happening. And I feel that on this land, in this country, we have discussed racism at a deep level, and we're beginning to untangle it to our capacity as a white-bodied person. And I think that's very important. The next level, I feel, is genocide. And that's a level that is more dynamic, I think, because when there's a victim, there's a perpetrator. So the victims of the land of genocide are Indigenous people, and the perpetrators would be the colonizers, which I am one. So how do I work with that and digest that? That, to me, is a great practice of really going to the center of my egocentricity and my need to be good, which is not really helpful in unraveling this karma of genocide. And one of the things that I've learned is that I don't really know the history of this country. I haven't been taught. I don't know, many of you may know Jim Bear Jacobs. He does a sacred sites tour at Fort Snelling regarding the concentration camp. And I used to bike there without knowing that it's a concentration camp. For Indigenous people in 1862, Indigenous women, children, and elders were detained there, and many people died. And this is a place that is it's a tourist attraction. I mean, Hidden Falls is at the Badote. So I think it's important that I understand the history, because if I am to unravel something, I need to understand it. And the other thing that I've learned is that sustainability, this country was sustained before first contact. It was thriving, it was alive. I mean, Indigenous peoples know about sustainability, and yet some of us are starting to turn towards their knowledge and understanding, but I think that there's really some wisdom there. And the other thing I'd like to say, as a white person, my responsibility is not to speak on behalf of Indigenous people. My responsibility is to step back and say, how can I help? What is needed in relation to my causes and condition? So in these conferences, in these retreats that I have worked with Indigenous leaders, what I have found is that as a white person, I do logistics. That's my role. I make sure that, or I work with the collective to ensure that people feel taken care of. So I don't have the mic. I'm in the background. And I think that's an important role for me in learning to kind of deconstruct how I am seen within this larger context. So I appreciate the question, Buff. Thank you.
And Onryu, that's really interesting to hear you talk about that. Do you find that there's a particular Buddhist character to that way of stepping back? I mean, the way you experience it, or
it's my practice of thinning my egocentricity. If we all have a need to be seen, I mean, it's kind of like the human condition, but we can be, there's many ways to be seen. And I think that we've been conditioned to be seen in a certain way. So when in meditation, what it supports this capacity to step back is the thinning of my need to be seen in this way, that I can offer gifts. And it doesn't need to be necessarily seen by everybody. It can be acknowledged just by me, knowing it's enough. I think it was Prasad or somebody was talking about it's enough, right? It's enough to be able to offer my gifts, right? It's enough to be present. So yeah.
thank you. Yeah. I think I understand better. Thank you. That's really moving. I appreciate that. I don't know if we don't have questions or if my chat just isn't working right, but feel free to drop questions in the chat if for somehow I'm missing them. Please, anybody let me know that. I do have some questions that I can offer if we don't have questions from our folks on the call here. The little bit that I know, Prasad, about Hinduism, and correct me if I'm mistaken, is that it's an ancient religion. When I think my experience with religion in my own context is, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years. But if I understand correctly, when we talk about Hinduism, we're talking 5,000, maybe more years. Does that depth or kind of ancient roots, do you find that gives a certain flavor or perspective that maybe you don't experience in others from other faiths, or that that presents itself within Hinduism in a particular way?
I mean, as I said, each religious tradition is vast in itself. So as a practicer of any religion or faith tradition, I think it takes probably a lifetime to really truly realize your potential. One of the things that Hinduism says is there's one truth and the wise speak of it in many ways. So I try to relate to the Hinduism that I grew up with, and essentially the more I study, I do see commonality in that truth in a lot of the other faith-based traditions. It's kind of the respect we need amongst each other, respect for the nature, respect for each other, some of the things about looking at history in an open way, not from just a Eurocentric perspective, but looking at what happened. We talk about United States, the indigenous people, what happened you can look at it around the world. Each place has its history. Hinduism dates back a long, long time ago. Luckily, it's an orally based tradition. So a lot of the knowledge got passed from one generation to the other. But there was a lot of things that happened in that Indian subcontinent as well, which translates to very similar things that potentially happened, in the lands of the United States a long time ago. But going back to my faith, I mean, essentially, it's not comes from a book, but it's kind of a library. That's how the religion works. So trying to understand every day, but the truth sort of stays the same. Anyone who kind of meditates, figures out, they will eventually come sort of to that same truth. And it does give me solace that, hey, this tradition has been practiced for 5,000 plus years and it still exists to date. So, there's something of value in it.
Thank you. That's interesting, the way we're talking about truth there. That's very rich. Thank you. Let's see, we have some responses. Uriah says, I'm thinking about my own Christian context. How do each of your respective religions view salvation? And if it is otherworldly, how do you work with followers of your tradition to ground them in the current reality of this earth and in the moment? Maybe we'd start with Rabbi Ricky on that, if you want to teach us from your tradition on that. Yeah.
Sure. So in Judaism, there is an understanding of something called the Olam Haba, or the world to come, which would be kind of this idea of having our souls return to God. But there's also very much an emphasis on saying that although that's that's there, that we're in the here and now, and how are we making our own world better. So that's something, at least in the Reformed tradition, which is the denomination that I'm a part of in Judaism, but I think in others as well. That it's talking about, although that we do have this understanding of that world to come, it's more about how can we create the best world here. How can we really make it so that we can all thrive and grow, and not just for us as but our entire earth as well.
Yeah. That's helpful. And is you mentioned in some of your writings to me, I think, about the concept of, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, tikkun olam.
Yes, tikkun olam. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Or
Sure. So tikkun olam means literally it's to repair the earth, and that's kind of what we put all of our at least at Temple Israel right now, but I think a lot of congregations do this, where their kind of justice work that they do is under the umbrella of that tikkun olam, that repairing the earth, coming together to make it, make the world, at a better place. There's other understandings of that, and there's actually a literal understanding of it coming from the Jewish mystic tradition, Kabbalah, that the earth is actually fractured and we're, kind of repairing it. Although I don't know, I'm not an expert on that at all, so I don't want to speak too much on it, but it's the tikkun olam is exactly what we would say is how we can come together to repair the earth, and all the more so when we're talking about, yes, let's repair the earth, but let's make it so that we can all live on here for eons to come.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you for that. Payton, I think I'd offer that question to you as well, because my own knowledge is that Christianity's got this escape, resurrection concept. Maybe escape isn't the right word, but that's sometimes how it's visioned of the central figure, Jesus, ascending away from the earth. So this question about if the salvation concept is otherworldly, how do you grapple with that with respect to the current reality?
Yeah, the language I was going to use is we've got an exit strategy in Christianity, and a lot of our salvation narratives really do lean heavily on that. I was engaging the text over the weekend, and the pastor at the church that I was at spoke to the fact that in the New Testament or the Christian sacred text, that literal word of heaven never actually appears, and one of the most important things that I think Jesus said during his ministry is that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And the way that we interpret that, the way that we read those words and we take them to heart, for me, it has to be that the love and care of God is present now. And so our concept of a kingdom of heaven can exist in this moment, in this present. And when I speak to other Christians who really do view, or anyone of any religion who views salvation as an otherworldly concept, an exit strategy of some sort, I'd always try to bring it back to the wisdom of our traditions that directs us to love and care in this moment, in this presence. And with the Christian tradition, I think that's very specific. It really does speak to Jesus' call and affirmation that we're here now to proclaim the kingdom of heaven in whatever community and space we are in. And we do so by loving each other and repairing the earth.
Thank you. That's a deeper take on Christianity than we sometimes hear. I appreciate that offering. Thank you. Prasad, I'm not familiar with Hinduism. Is there a concept that would be correlate to salvation, and is it otherworldly, as the questioner here asked us? I think that's Uriah. Yep.
So the way Hinduism talks about salvation, or we call it moksha, is you understand your true nature. You realize the aim of a human life is to realize that God is within you already. And we are sort of distracted by the materialness of this world, thinking this is it. And this is kind of our, action ground, meaning whatever, we believe in, multiple lives, so that soul that's within me gets multiple opportunities to make it right and finally figure out what my true nature is, or find that divinity within me. And we come back to this earth and go through multiple lessons to kind of get there. So when we talk about salvation, we're basically trying to figure out who we are. And once we figure that out, we realize that we don't have to go anywhere. We're already there, but it's an internal journey you take to come to that realization, which is partly, as I said, doing your duty selflessly to the community at large, to everybody around you, meditating, what Buddhism teaches, to look inwards, and you will find your salvation. And eventually, if you get that true answer, then you sort of transcend this material existence and become one with that divinity, which is sort of omnipresent.
Well, that's very helpful to understand. Yeah, that does resonate with the little bit that I've read and experienced about Mahatma Gandhi and others in the tradition. Yeah, wow. In order to get to some of the other questions, I think we've heard some on Buddhism on this question a little bit. I want to move to the other questions here. And I think we've got two that are really good to kind of close us out tonight. One is to reflect on, is there anything within your own tradition that might be leading towards climate change, not protecting us from, or might be a shadow within our faith tradition that's doing that? And you can reflect on that if you like. And then a good one to maybe close us out for the evening would be, is there a book or a podcast or a resource with respect to your tradition that you really like, that would be a gift, that you could offer us here tonight to either dig more into your faith tradition or into what your faith tradition says about climate change, or either or both, or something like that. So, and maybe I'll just give a little space for reflection, and anybody who's ready to answer those could step in.
Buff, may I just ask for clarification? Are you asking what the shadow side is regarding our faith traditions in relation to climate change?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for helping me clarify that. It looks like this is from Hannah in the chat. I think it's a good question. Kind of, what are some religious mindsets within your own faith tradition that could be contributing to climate change or getting in the way, kind of holding us back from addressing climate change?
I would just like to just say something on that briefly.
Please.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think in Buddhism is that sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck on just sitting on the cushion and watching our minds. And that's great. But there's a lot of suffering that's going on right now in the world. There's a lot of action that needs to happen. And that's where we engage the practice. So the energy that we receive from meditation is used and employed on behalf of our suffering in the suffering world. And so I just want to say that that's a shadow side that Buddhists were aware of, and wanting to really pivot that in a way that really supports addressing climate change, racial justice, because they're often intertwined, the racial disparities within climate change. And for Buddhists to become more knowledgeable about how they're intersecting, and how can we address that shadow side in a way that is helpful for ourselves and all beings. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Appreciate your answer. Onryu, do you have a book or a resource that you'd like to offer our gathering?
I was just thinking of a book. He's not a Zen Buddhist. He's actually a Theravadan Buddhist. His name is Bhikkhu's Bodhi. And he's got a book on engaged Buddhism in relationship to the sutras. And I don't have the exact name of it. So what I'd like to do is get the name of that book and send it to you, Buff.
Yes, I can include it in the email that we use to follow up with this. That's great.
Yeah, he's an engaged Buddhist. Yeah, he's great.
Thank you, Onryu. That's great. Can I offer that question from Hannah to anybody? Rabbi Ricky, you want to tackle that one, or?
Sure. So I had it a little bit is in my notes, but didn't end up speaking about it before when I was discussing this idea of to work and to guard the land. And although that sounds wonderful, especially when we're thinking about guarding the land around us, when we think about to work, what that really means is, of course, to bring fruit from it, to plant, to really be engaged in agriculture. And although that's all good things, and making sure that we can have enough to eat for everyone, there is a certain point when that becomes exploitative. And so there is, I think, that tension in that commandment of work and to guard, that hopefully that things are in balance, where it is something that's always sustainable. And there's some extra laws, that I didn't get to, about how once every 7 years the land needs to rest, all these things like that. But I think that in the pursuit of, I guess, I don't know exactly how I would phrase this, in the pursuit of abundance, there's a there can be danger in exploiting the land, and making it so that we're actually going counter to those ideals that we have of really being guarding in the land, that I think I see in that tension between those two words of to work and to guard in that commandment that I mentioned. So I think that there is something there that that's worth exploring, and how we can understand that better, and making sure that with that balance is in balance.
Thank you. Yeah.
And if you're interested in about Judaism, I guess I have a couple that are always my go-tos. Where am I here? Oh, just had them up. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Living a Jewish Life by Anita Diamond is a great one. And The most important things to know about the Jewish religion by Joseph Telushkin. Both wonderful rabbis that have made some really wonderful some wonderful sources on that. And for anyone who's interested in some science fiction books, because that's how I actually originally read the question, was just any books that I could. And I was excited to talk about The Expanse, which is one of my favorite science fiction books, but actually not that irrelevant because it talks about how we deal with resources and as we expand, further into the solar system.
Oh, wow. The Expanse. All right. Thank you. Some good books there. Payton, would you like to tackle that question from Hannah?
Yeah, it really dovetails with what we were talking about earlier for me, because I think one of the biggest shadow sides, to borrow language, of Christianity is our very concept of salvation and an otherworldly heaven. That mindset and that understanding really contributes to Christians taking a sort of pass and saying, the world is going to burn anyway. The earth is just a temporary placeholder for my eternal life. And that can be deeply problematic and difficult to respond to within our tradition for our faith leaders. And so, just to elaborate on my response to that, I really encourage Christians to consider how artfully God created the earth in our cosmology. And if God so lovingly and intentionally formed every speck and inch of the universe, how is it that we can so thoughtlessly neglect it? And so, I think that's the shadow side. And I think that's my response to it is just that encouragement to really be conscious and dig deep on what a creative and loving and relational God would call us to do, given all that we know about them. And then
a
book
or resource.
Sally McFaig has a beautiful book called The Body of God that is one of my favorite texts. It's a little bit weighty, but I'd encourage anyone to engage it because it really is rich.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for that. Prasad, does that question speak to you within the Hindu tradition? Or?
I mean, it does. I was kind of, racking my brain here to see how that, applies to us. I'm sure there's a lot of things, but sometimes the most common thing is, there's some calamity or something happens. You just say, oh, it's the will of God. And then you just get to praying, right? But what about the actions? How about taking a step back, trying to relate to what are my actions doing? Yes, praying is one part of, sort of coming back to the equilibrium, but also doing my part, on sort of a local level or, whatever I can do materially, that I think is important too. And sometimes we just tend to forget that, like praying is the quick answer, but it shouldn't be all the time. It should be simultaneous. And as far as books go, I mean, Bhagavad Gita is one of the most common, books in Hinduism. It's a conversation between Krishna and his disciple, and it kind of talks a lot of, environmental things as well, the relationship of, the humans to the world at large. It's kind of summarized in there. So someone who wants to, understand a little bit more Hinduism and understand these concepts, there's a lot of options out there.
Oh, thanks. That's excellent. Well, thank you all for your time tonight. I want to if we were all in a big room together, we would be applauding you for all your gifts to us tonight. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge that you all have daily lives that demand gifts and service from you in all different ways, and you took time to really think about your tradition and come prepared to talk about it and offer us the jewels of your traditions, and I really appreciate the time that you took for that, and the care and the gentleness that you offered us tonight, and I really appreciate you being here and your time. Folks, great recommendations in the chat. MNIPL will look at those, and We look forward to creating another webinar maybe in about 6 months that's focuses on some other faith traditions. And really appreciate everybody being here tonight and focusing on the ways that these faith traditions kind of carry us forward and the way they speak to this most important issue in our lives today. So I'd welcome any parting words that any of you all would like to say to close this out.
I just want to say thank you, a big shout out to MNIPL for the work that you do and the gifts that you offer all beings in this great earth and non-beings. Thank you. And may your work continue to be mutually beneficial to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, just big thank yous.
Yeah, echoing the gratitude. And I dropped my email in the chat if anybody wants to connect further about spirituality and nature and talk further about how it connects to climate advocacy.
Great. We'll follow up with an email with resources and whatnot that we talked about tonight. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and thanks again to our panelists. Good night.